feeding on my tension. My countrymen, they love their fiction. Words upon now, it's made with good intentions.
Welcome to 1 or 200, the independent media and politics podcast. It's Saturday morning, and weather across the country is a little bit chilly and grey. I don't know, that's not going to be a good segue to say, as are my co-hosts, but I am joined by co-hosts who are cheery and of sunny disposition, I'm sure. Thank you for joining us. Pmax, how are you doing?
I would like to be chilly. I am feeling grey though, so half accurate assessment on that part.
Okay, all right. And just quickly from you, how's the new little podcast product going?
Well, I was already kind of doing a private version of it for friends, so it's basically just an evolution of that particular innovation, we'll call it. I'm disrupting the podcast space, and it's really fun.
And if you want to hear some of that disruption of the 1 or 200 podcast space, we're dropping episodes every fortnight. It is Pmax driving in his car to work and talking about education, which we'll talk a little bit more about today. We're also very happily joined by Jack McDonald. How are you doing, Jack?
Good, Carl. I'm pretty good. It's good to be back. Been a while.
Yeah, it's been a little while. Glad to have you back as well. And is this one of the worst? I don't know. Is it hyperbole? I'm really struggling to figure out when I'm exaggerating or not about the New Zealand political environment and the continuous attacks on Māori, Pasifika, and poor people, and the disabled, and women, and etc. But I genuinely can't remember a time when the party of government was this overt with the race baiting, and just the outright nastiness, all the venality and kind of lobbying connections aside. Jack, maybe as far as the race baiting goes, it's never been good. Like, it's in our, I guess, generation, you can go back to Forster and Seabed under Helen Clark. That was some pretty nasty stuff. But even then, it doesn't feel like it has the same tenor as what's happening regularly, like every day. Under the National Coalition government.
No, you're definitely right. I would say that this is the most explicitly anti-Māori racist government that we've seen since Muldoon, but arguably even longer. Arguably, and some are saying that it's the most racist government since the early 1900s, when we had governments like premiers like Seddon and Vogel, who were still undertaking colonization in a very explicit way, using the Public Works Act to confiscate vast tracts of land across the country, and being quite explicit. Members of Parliament were still very explicit in their racism. That's when when phrases like "smooth the pillow of the dying race" came into existence, and we did see a lot of racism continuing on in the 20th century, including from Labour governments, like, for all that we hold up the first Labour government. A lot of those social welfare programs that were implemented explicitly excluded Māori. For example, the state housing project for a long time. And then, national governments of that era, moving forward to Muldoon, were very explicitly anti-Māori rights and, had violent crackdowns on protest and occupation, like we saw at Bastion Point. But, I think even that wasn't the whole government wasn't driven by an anti-Māori agenda in the same way that this one really is. And so it's, since the 80s, at least, since probably the mid-70s really, but particularly the 80s when the fourth Labour government came into power, both National and Labour have had a bipartisan consensus on trying to settle, quotes unquotes, the treaty through settlements, which is a fallacy, of course, to begin with, but in saying that, they were still very much trying to move forward and, settle historical wrongs and kind of assuage Pākehā guilt about the past. And, for all intents and purposes, the country was moving forward, race relations were improving, and, that was very much in response to the Māori Renaissance and the fact that they had to accommodate, our increasing demands for for power and for revitalization, and all the resources that needed to go with that. Yeah, to cut a long story short, the current national government has completely overturned that bipartisan consensus. They say they're still, in theory, in support of treaty settlements, but they're doubling down on the foreshore and seabed stuff. They're undermining the very foundations of like kind of treaty law as it's developed since the 70s. And, even if they vote down Seymour's treaty principles bill, which seems very likely, that's not necessarily the most insidious thing they're doing anyway. They've also committed to, in the coalition agreement with New Zealand First, to remove treaty principles and references to the treaty in law. They've already started doing that. The Corrections Amendment Bill was an example where they have already removed references to the treaty, and that is potentially far more dangerous because it's those treaty clauses in legislation that actually enables people to challenge government decisions in the judiciary. So, that's kind of the high-level state of play, and I worry that we're all getting a bit too distracted by the Treaty Principles Bill in one sense and kind of not focusing enough on everything else that they're pushing through that is actually probably more dangerous.
Yeah, and not really getting the same coverage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, going back to my university days, which is much longer than I thought it was when I said that. But I remember doing New Zealand politics and Māori politics papers and writing about New Zealand First treaty principles bills back then, 2 decades ago, and there was a consensus then that it was intentionally divisive, and that didn't make sense, that there was no reason to do it except to attack Māori. And yet here we are. It's really, really worrying. And I think alongside this, the setting of new precedents around some of the way that this is interacted with in the political context. And some people will say this is naivete. Maybe I was a little too optimistic. But what has surprised me, what has genuinely surprised me as a cynic and antagonist of New Zealand media, is the way that our media organizations, by and large, in the mainstream, have lined up with the government to help communicate their program of work rather than criticize or even analyze what the outcomes, what the consequences of this work might be. Like for a paper like the Herald, you kind of expect it. That's what they were created to do. They were founded as an implement of war and colonization against Māori. But you always think, there are some people in there. I do know some good journalists, there's some good reporters. Surely there will be more than just a token pushback. Because, people can always point to stories and say, look, there's that story there where they had a crack at Seymour. But it just doesn't matter in the wider context where the people like David Seymour, Winston Peters is a bit out of the limelight, but maybe some of his ministers, some of the more aggressive national ministers or who are in the spotlight, like Willis or Shane Reti, who we'll talk about a bit more soon, just getting their press releases reported on as news in itself, when it's very clearly a communications decision and strategy from the party making these decisions. And as was found as well, and yes, nod towards the media for reporting on this as it comes out. Often when they've said something like that, in a couple of months, something will be leaked. We'll get access to some advice via an OIA, and you'll find they were just outright lying. A really good example of that in the last week and a half, I guess, that the 1.4 billion shortfall that Shane Reti was using to make cuts, talking about different levels of management and like, we're overspending in health. Just not true. Just 100% not true. And these are the kind of things that are so drastically wrong that maybe I'm calibrated badly. And I know there's like a habit on the left in particular of saying like, if that was a left-wing politician, they would have been fucking hounded out if they'd done even half of what's happened with this National Party minister. But it's just so stark. I could not see someone, we've seen people hounded for a couple of weeks for getting like a very specific GDP or other economic number wrong by a couple of percentage points, right? Like that's a classic gotcha. This is $1.4 billion that they knew didn't exist as a as a point of reasoning that they used as a communication strategy and had it republished across every single outlet as the justification for making deep, dangerous cuts to New Zealand health public services, for removing the board of Health New Zealand, as it's now called, because we can't use Māori words, and installing this guy who's got one of the worst histories of leadership in New Zealand, Lester Levi, who's now appointing a whole bunch of his mates as deputy commissioners and taking the bill for his level of management into the millions. How do the two of you feel about that context? Are we too deep in it? Are we watching too closely, or is this something that you feel the wider public will potentially starting to go, wait a fucking second, as well?
Something I did want to talk about about a bit earlier about like the the difference between like historic government actions and current ones, especially in like the recent latter half of the 20th century, 21st century, because obviously racism's been a huge part of politics in New Zealand. I think the difference with this government compared to say Muldoon's is the racism of the Muldoon government came across as very opportunistic, sort of we'll use this for populism. People really want to hate Pacific people for some reason, so we'll do some like ostentatious dawn raids and that'll boost the numbers. Whereas it's not popular now, overwhelmingly so. We can see that with like the Māori wards being rejected by almost every council. The abolition of Māori wards being rejected by every council. This is sort of coming from the top down, in my perspective. It seems to be very ideologically driven. As to like the health stuff, the health stuff has just been driving me insane this entire week because it's such an open looting of the public space, and it just reminds me of like someone creeping up to a storefront, like a jewelry store, dressed like the fucking Hamburglar, holding out a sign being like, "I intend to steal your jewels," and there's just sort of like everyone's pretending it doesn't exist. I can't quite diagnose it, but even the reporting in the state that it's in is communicating to me how dire the situation is. But I'm not sure. I guess it's sort of like a frog in the boiling pot kind of vibe. I don't know. just a bit wild.
It really is. And I think kind of to answer your question a little bit, Kyle, or to attempt to, I think the public do care about, the looting of the health system, but I think the real problem that we're facing is that we have an incredibly ineffective opposition at the moment. At the start of the term, first kind of 6 months of this government, I actually had real hope that we could potentially make it a one-term government because there was just such chaos coming from the Prime Minister and his lack of leadership in terms of the government. And, the media were thriving on that chaos. But now they've settled into somewhat of a rhythm. They're a little bit less incompetent. They at least know how to communicate their chaos more effectively. And the opposition is still dismissing an action. I mean, it almost goes without saying in terms of Labour, just how useless they are. But, then you've got the Greens and still focus on internal drama like they always have been, really, since Matirio and Russell left, because they've had no effective leadership to bring their caucus and their party alongside the direction of the leadership. And then Te Pāti Māori have been good on some things and kind of missing an action on others. And I wrote in my column recently about the fact that, opposition MPs, particularly in in the Greens and Te Pāti Māori, for the most part are all first-term MPs and brand new to Parliament. And you can really see the impact of that in the sense that, they're really not landing many hits. They're not kind of digging deep into their portfolios and holding ministers to account, which is the job of opposition backbench MPs. Te Pāti Māori, for example, only 2 of their 6 MPs have members' bills in the ballot, which is just such a waste of opportunity. But to get back to health and, to kind of tie in education as well, like what the opposition should have been doing is communicating that we're actually seeing a march towards privatization of the public institutions that New Zealanders hold most dearly. I think it was kind of criminal the lack of opposition that we've so far seen to the charter schools legislation, for example, because this isn't the charter schools of the last national government. The legislation is so much worse in the sense that it is essentially allowing the government through Seymour's appointed board to essentially privatize a school, even if that school board doesn't agree, basically just on the recommendation of someone in the school community, whatever that means. It could be a single parent or someone who lives nearby, probably recommending that becomes a charter school. And then, of course, you've both already talked about the health system, and we're already in such a dire situation in terms of wait times, and in terms of understaffing, that is only going to get worse, which will make the case for privatization. So yeah, as much as, and then of course we're seeing the moves of Kiwibank, but as much as this government tries to say, oh no, we're not going to privatize anything, they're laying the foundations for mass privatization across the public sector, and we should be deeply concerned about it.
What's absurd to me is I've had a couple of actual journalists in my mentions having a crack about people saying that this is a privatization agenda. Like, oh no, they'd never do it. Like, this is your job. Like, what the fuck do you mean? We've seen this happen in every fucking Western country ever. They're basically saying, hey, we're out there to privatize it. Like, there's no other reason to drive down services under austerity other than to do this. What do you mean they're not going to do it? They might not succeed at doing it, but they're really fucking stuff up, and it's what they want. I guess on that note, we've seen a couple of things happen in the health space this week. The first was people in the hospitals were asked not to use the term code black anymore. And they changed the warning scale. The top is now code red, and it has a higher threshold. So code black was we are drastically understaffed. I think we've had 135% or 145% capacity. Someone died this week while waiting in the ED. And this is a direct result of national coalition policy around cost cuts and hiring freezes and just generally attacking health professionals and institutions. We see this pretty regularly from national governments changing the reporting structures so they can say, oh, look, it got better. There are less code blacks now. We must be doing something right. No, you removed it. We've seen it in in the housing space as well, in MSD. Oh, there's so much less people on benefits. Yeah, you kicked everyone off the benefits. Why do we think this method or this strategy is one of their go-tos, and does it really work? Or do you think people are starting to grasp, given the state of things, that this is just bullshit?
So the people on the receiving end of a lot of this policy are aware, and if I think the coalition has miscalculated anywhere, I think it's in how many people are going to be on the receiving end of all of these changes. I anecdotally and just observationally online, so also anecdotally, people who are insulated from these impacts will just take whatever the latest announcement is from the government at face value. As long as there's not sort of like critical ongoing reporting on the channels that they see, they're not going to acknowledge that. And I guess that's one of the issues that I perceive with our media landscape is if Shane Reddy lies about $1.4 billion missing, he gets 6 months of saying $1.4 billion deficit, and then there's one article about how that was actually a lie, and then that disappears. And the narrative that stays is the $1.4 billion deficit, not the fact that Shane Reddy told a big old fib.
And it's so true. And the only thing I would add to that is that, just anecdotally, like a really worrying amount of people buy into the narrative that, we have to do these public service cuts. The country's broke. And the left do a really poor job of communicating fiscal policy and the fact that, these arguments that the country is broke are ridiculous. So, and I'm talking about people on the left, ostensibly, progressive-minded people, union members, etc. That's kind of why we need an effective opposition. But also, even if they were, being more active, it's hard to see, for example, the Labour Party actually pushing back on those fiscal arguments because they largely believe them.
Yeah, I
And
think one of sorry.
oh, sorry, I was just going to add, and Chris Hipkins laid the groundwork for this when he was Prime Minister and campaigning, basically cutting back all of the policies that they were doing on the basis of cost saving. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, it was always like, and we said this at the time. If Labour goes into the campaign with an austerity mindset, all that's doing is giving National a layup. They're running with it. They're going for the dunk. I think you're right, Jack, around the lack of effective pushback. The number one and perhaps only argument I regularly see from within the electoral space is, and it's a fair argument. If we're so broke, then why are you giving $2.9 billion to landlords? However, that while being true and like a call out on hypocrisy or whatever, it reinforces the frame. You're not winning on that rhetoric. You need to have a wider communication strategy to ensure that people know actually we're not broke. We can afford this, and here is how. Maybe the people who are all getting private healthcare right now because they're fucking filthy rich should pay a little bit more. For example, there are different ways to change the tenor and the direction of that argument, and as you say, Labour just hasn't been interested in that. Well, not many people have been interested in that. The other, slightly worse, I think, in some respects, health news this week, and is related less to austerity strategy, but still plays off it, is this fucking horrific attack on Māori and Pasifika, with the ACT Party and David Seymour initially attacking the health sector in the Hawke's Bay for prioritizing Māori and Pacific youth for free doctor's visits because they need them, but claiming that that meant we're prioritizing along racial lines, not evidential ones, and kind of spinning out this fantasy that somehow if a young Māori or Pacific person showed up at the ED, they'd get shunted to the front of the queue over people with like an amputated limb or in the middle of a heart attack. And the way that media in particular, like ACT and National are going to do, like, are just going to be heinous. Like, we expect that. But the way that media have just gobbled that up and regurgitated it is fucking disgusting. That then, it spread wider across the coalition. Shane Reddy started saying stuff as well, like, oh yeah, we need to remove all of this. There's an expectation that everyone prioritizes just on need, and we don't have Māori or Pacific people in that list of needs. Nicola Willis was out there, Christopher Luxon was out there, and there's this like a public service wide direction sent out for everyone to change their rules around this stuff. And this is one of those things, Jack, which you're saying, like, there's a treaty principles bill kind of percolating in the background for the next 6 months, but this is a direct physical attack on Māori and Pasifika.
Absolutely. And I think you kind of alluded to it, Kyle, but if you're going to prioritize on the basis of need, particularly for primary healthcare, you actually have to have a framework to achieve that. And the framework is like, okay, well, we know Māori and Pasifika young people have some of the worst stats around preventative health and well-being in general. So, okay, we're going to prioritize making sure that they're seen. They're also, harder to actually get into doctors' clinics. So let's prioritize that. It's not like you said, in an emergency department where the need is very obvious and you can triage that accordingly. So from even that logical perspective, it makes no sense. But this is really just highlights how extreme this government is. And I think I saw you saying on Twitter, Kyle, like, we can no longer just pretend like this is David Seymour and the more extreme elements of the coalition. This is a coalition-wide directive, and it really kind of highlights as well how duplicitous Shane Desi has been. When he disestablished the Māori Health Authority, he said that it doesn't matter, we're just going to do this in other ways. We're going to use devolution of resources to Māori health providers. We're going to follow the advice of these iwi Māori partnership boards. We're going to ensure that Māori health still improves. And I think there was some acceptance for those arguments because, Shane Leti has a background in Māori and community health. But what we're seeing is that couldn't be further from the truth. And I don't know what's going on behind closed doors, at the cabinet level. And frankly, I don't really care, because it doesn't matter who is pushing these policies. The fact is that there is wide buy-in for them across the coalition, and they are going to cost lives. It's as simple as that. It's going to kill people. As we were talking about earlier, austerity kills, but so does racism. And those two things combined is frankly just evil. And yeah, I don't know what more there is to say about it, really. The only thing I will say is that the timing made it even worse. When Shane Leti made these comments was on the day that person did die in ED, and yeah, they were in different regions. The person who died was in Rotorua, and they're talking about Hawke's Bay Health, and it was about GP visits rather than ED visits. But the public don't necessarily understand that level of nuance. The fact that they said that on the same day, could imply that, because Māori are being seen, people are dying, because, in the waiting room. So anyway, I just thought that was also particularly galling, the timing of it.
One thing I'd just add as well is there's sort of like a lack of curiosity that I'm seeing in a lot of reporting on it. I know I keep going back to the reporting, but it really is one of the key areas where people can learn and so forth, and that the gap is in outcomes. So the government said that they're going to cut the beneficiary numbers, as you were saying before. Where are those beneficiaries going to go? There's sort of no curiosity as to what's going to happen. We're going to cut the health budget. Okay, well, where are sick people going to go? And we heard about that earlier this week when they were talking about opening up private hospital beds.
Yeah, a bit of a clue.
Yeah, and also charter schools as well. We're gonna fix the education system by making more charter schools. And you do not have to be a genius to figure out that private things cost more than public things. That this is well established. Everyone knows this. So when the government is openly saying, "Oh, we're going to open more charter schools, we're going to start using private beds, we're going to do this, we're going to do that," why is there no reporting or curiosity or engagement with the fact that, oh, actually, things are going to cost more and probably be delivered worse under this outcome? We've got empirical evidence from across the world that when this happens, cause and effect. It's just kind of a bit infuriating, really. And I guess I come back to this a lot in my thinking, and it's sort of a cold comfort. But the people who are failing to report and push these narratives are also going to eventually feel the impacts of it. So there's some comfort in that eventually these people will feel remorse, even if that does come at great expense. Extremely cold comfort, frigid comfort.
Yeah, and I guess we're not in as bad a situation in some regards, in that sense, as a place like the UK or maybe even the US, where our media cohort are from incredibly well-off families earning megabucks, right? Like we don't have as much of a media class that is part of the landed gentry. As some of our Western partners. There are going to be people who are working in media who are already feeling this crunch. And again, there are people in media doing some good work. And some of the stuff we find out about, because there are really good reporters who are trying to get their teeth into it. The problem is media leadership and the platforms that they're part of, and the lockstep that we've seen the establishment outlets act in concert with around some of this stuff. And another example, just in the education space, just as a quick aside, last weekend we had Bevan Holloway on to talk about what's happening with the curriculum review, and some really shocking stuff that came out with an OIA around kind of the anti-democratic misuse of process and the way in which parts of the I guess New Zealand Initiative linked think tank folks were skipping procurement processes with the blessing of the minister. No one's reporting on it. And I think Bevan said on the podcast he'd tried to get this picked up. This is an enormous story, and people are just like, that's interesting, and not covering it at all. There've been, I think, one or two pieces just mentioning the OIA because there are some juicy email comments in there. But these are the kind of things where they're similar to, for example, a Labour minister crashing their car. There should be weeks of coverage about this kind of thing. And I don't know how to hammer that into people's heads that like an individual kind of crisis is absolutely not news to the same extent that a cohort, a cabal of far-right radical neoliberal think tankers are actively breaking procurement processes with the Ministry of Education to rewrite parts of the curriculum that were out of scope and try to force that on schools. And you know, there's these arguments, oh, people don't want to hear that. Are you fucking kidding me? Like, I'm of a very, very strong belief that if this stuff was being reported in the same way or more vociferously than some of the scandals of years gone by, you'd have parents, teachers, students, a large number of voters in New Zealand up in arms about it because people don't want to see this happen. They don't want the education system to get fucked up. They don't want the health system to be fucked up. They want those things to work. And that's why I'm like, you know, if you're not reporting on that stuff, you're complicit. If you end up as someone who is able to direct media conversations and communication in the way that you report on this stuff, and you end up in a bad situation of your own making around this because you helped to enable it, fuck you. Like it shouldn't have to get to that point before someone rings the alarm bells.
The media landscape is fundamentally broken, and I know that's not a new thing, but like it's getting worse. And you know, there are a lot of great journalists out there doing work. But so, for example, you know, I think a lot of the best work has still been done at RNZ. But say like an RNZ reporter publishes a story about a policy issue, instead of reporters from other outlets going and trying to find new angles and, you know, trying to extend the story, now they've just been syndicated across all these different platforms. So you get the same exact story published in the Herald and in Stuff and on Māori TV. And, you know, so it's almost like through years of underfunding and all the rest of it, we're now in the situation where all the outlets are essentially complicit in you know, their uselessness. And it's pretty scary because, you know, it's almost like the traditional incentives are no longer there for journalists to actually be competitive and to try and one up each other, which is, you know, healthy in a democracy. It's like, because I, you know, in my job I work as a comms person, and it's so hard to get cut through on any issues anymore. Like, all you can hope for is for like one story to be published, even if it's a massive issue, and unless, of course, it's some scandal like you know, an MP falling out of favor with their party, and then it will be wall-to-wall coverage on every platform with all of these different angles, whether they matter or not. So yeah,
just on the syndication bit as well, one of the really shocking things I've found in the last couple of weeks is both Stuff and the New Zealand Herald are syndicating articles from the Telegraph in the UK, which is like one of the it's a really bad paper, folks. We like to fucking crow about how we don't have Murdoch here. Ooh, we got two of the like biggest New Zealand outlets republishing some fucking nasty shit out of the Telegraph, you know, which is like a home of anti-trans and racist and poor bashing rhetoric. Why? Like, who is making these decisions? Like, and it comes back to this thing. Media leadership is fucking done. There are like so many of the people who are in positions to make, and we talked about this around Palestine as well, who are in a position to make decisions about what and what is not covered. I was gonna say something that needed to be bleeped out, probably, but they're evil. They're evil and they're nasty, and they are our enemies. I want to be very clear about that. There's no longer an accountability function that is underway in our fourth estate. It is something else entirely at this point. In further news, I did want to get to this treaty principles bill. And I know you said at the beginning, Jack, that it's the other stuff as well, which is really important. But I think I want to have a little bit of a conversation about the way that this is being undertaken, how it's maybe a bit historically different than stuff we've had like this in the past, and what it's going to look like and what purpose it's being used for. So this is David Seymour's bill, and you know, both National and he have gone to great pains to say, oh, it's in the coalition agreement and we promised to take it to first reading. So we're just going to have to let this be part of the national conversation. And this is despite every time Luxon is on the podium, he says, no, not gonna do it. We're definitely not passing this into law. Definitely not gonna do it. No. Well, since they came to government, really. And then David Seymour gets asked about it. And this played out in the news just yesterday. And it's the same conversation that's happened 5,000 fucking times. David Seymour says, I think he'll change his mind. But he said he won't. He said he won't. Oh, no. But, 6 months is a long time in politics. Blah, blah, blah. And I just can't see this as has any other purpose except to be the next step. Because let's be clear, this stuff started back probably in 2022, 2021. The next step in attacking Māori, attacking Te Tiriti, and trying to undo any partnership between Māori and the Crown. And this is the political, the electoral, I guess the executive element of creating enough space in the national conversation to kickstart a people's initiated referendum. Like that just seems... That has been clear to me. You can go back to my tweets. I've been talking about this for years since the co-governance stuff was coming out via Groundswell and the TPU and other groups like that against Three Waters. It was clear that they were undertaking a narrative and discourse strategy similar to that rolled out by people in the UK doing Brexit, similar to that rolled out by people in Australia doing the Voice vote. On the right, to divide the electorate, often along racial lines. Yes, even in Brexit, there's a very strong undercurrent about immigrants and refugees, and then use that to win the next election with an incredibly destructive mandate. Jack, what has it been like kind of watching this develop? And does the way I've explained it sound correct to you?
Totally. I mean, I think you've almost said it all, to be honest. I was going to talk about the fact that this is really about holding space and giving a platform in the national political conversation to move towards a citizens initiated referendum. So I agree with that completely, and I think that there is a really good chance that Seymour will be able to succeed in gathering the 300,000 signatures or whatever it is to initiate that referendum. But it's an interesting one because in some ways, even if they get their referendum, and I think if they do get their referendum, a large majority of New Zealanders will vote for whatever absurd proposition the question is framed as, in favor of an anti-treaty position, because we just have such little treaty education in this country and so much racism as well. But even if that's all to happen, in some ways, I don't think it's going to change much legally. I mean, you can't rewrite a historical treaty, for example, but it pushes the conversation so far to the right, and it weaponizes the conversation so much to an anti-Māori racist position that the damage will be seen in lots of other ways. Really what this is an attempt to resist the ongoing reclamation from tangata whenua of culture, of rights, of land, of what was lost in colonization. And, we're in the midst of a Māori Renaissance at the moment. This is really the third Māori Renaissance, in my view. The first being in the time of Apirana Ngata and James Carroll and Maui Pomare. The second being in the 80s, which saw the rise of, the Kohanga Reo movement and Te Reo Māori revitalization and in fact the treaty settlements process. And, it doesn't take a genius to look around and see that we're in a similar space now. Whether it's, the increasing strength and resolve of young Māori, just the burst of pride in being Māori, the way that Māori culture is dominating music, art, sport, our platform on the international stage, and what Seymour is trying to channel and reflect in his actions is the reaction to that. He's riling up all of the people who get pissed off that Guy and Espiner or whoever is using Te Reo on morning radio, and the racist Pākehā older generations cannot escape Māori culture now, and it infuriates them. And I don't think that they're going to succeed in stopping this ongoing revitalization. And so we're in for a tough few decades probably still, but I have every confidence that Māori are going to continually secure our place in this country, at the very center of society in Aotearoa. But it's going to be ugly. The demographic and the kind of historical forces are in our favor, and that's what scares these people so much, and why Seymour knows he can make a lot of political hay off it, because we're in for a long run. He is fully committed to increasing his own political power off the back of this. I don't think he even necessarily cares about it too much. It's about furthering his own political ambitions off the back of racism.
Yeah, I think what you were saying about the demographics of it was absolutely nail on the head, because National Act, New Zealand First are all looking at that generation that is, bless their souls, on the way out. Once they're gone, their power base is vanished, because even the young wings of their party, even the up and comers, most of them are on board with Māori being a core part of government, a core part of how business operates in New Zealand, like Māori culture just being an assumed core. I'm losing my words, but they've got like maybe this term, maybe their next one, and then it's over. And I think that could be part of the motivation behind a lot of the nastiness and desperation, honestly, that we're seeing, is they've got one shot.
Yeah, I think we also need to keep in mind the global context as well. So as I pointed out, we've seen this happen in Australia, we've seen this happen in the UK, we're seeing this happen across the West, really. There's a level of projection, a level of disingenuity around the way that the neoliberal right wing, and it's not just conservative parties, like the classic right of centre parties. The voice happened under Labour in Australia. In the UK, there are parts of the Labour Party who ended up flipping each way on Brexit and things like that as well. The centre parties have never been unhappy to dip into anti-Indigenous or anti-immigration rhetoric. A large part of this is we're in a series of crises right now. It's not just about race. Even when David Seymour is projecting about that, saying, "Oh, it's Māori who want to make this about race." Okay, I mean, first up, fuck you. Like, it's clearly not the case. Like, everyone knows who's doing the race baiting here. Everyone knows who's trying to drive racial division, and it's the person saying, we want everyone to be equal and we don't want racial division in a vacuum. But it's also about the capital class trying to grab everything and funnel as much power and resource to themselves as possible during a time where there's a big effort around decolonization, where there are a lot of movements who are starting to say, wait a second, I think it's time for a bit more equity here. And Indigenous movements are seen as a real threat, and I would argue a core threat to the continued veracity with which capital, the very, very, very wealthy, the very powerful, are able to vacuum up the remaining scraps from the rest of us. So, and I think that speaks to what you were saying as well, Jack. A lot of these people don't really care about the issue in and of itself. It's what they can do with it that is important. And I think, for that reason, there are a lot more people who are happy to go along with it because they're like, give me mine, than we might otherwise have seen. Pmax, you talked about that generational shift. There are still going to be a lot of really rich, like, people of our generation who are like, I get like fucking 20 more houses, so guess it falls out in my favor. We're good. And I guess I just want people to be really, really clear about, how the power dynamics work here as much as anything else. And I think even the ACT Party here, who tend, and the right wing here, who tend to be a little bit more conservative with their rhetoric than people in the US or the UK, even they have dipped into terms like cultural Marxism and the like. Now and then, you can find mentions of this. Not so much if they're on a big media platform, but they'll mention that kind of thing through their social media accounts. They'll pop up doing that, and they'll definitely have their horde of social media sock puppet accounts, inauthentic engagement managers out there doing this work and building this discourse for them as well. Yeah, I think, especially from the left, because this argument happens so often and it's so fucking boring. This isn't about identity politics or whatever you want to fucking smear it with. Our Indigenous people are one of the key ways in which the left wins this fucking fight, and that is why they are under attack from the entirety of the Western ruling class. You
Just
stand in
to
solidarity with them, or you don't, and fuck you if you don't.
just to pick up on that, Kyle, because I think it's a really important point. Like the reason why things aren't as bad as they could be in Aotearoa, as opposed to say Australia, like you're talking about, is the demography stuff that we've already talked about, but it's also the point to which Māori have achieved political power in this country and are a real political threat in a way that, is far greater than the far lefters, for example. And so, you had recently the to be honest, extraordinary admission from Chris Hipkins in Māori media that Māori didn't cede sovereignty. And yeah, well, in the next breath, he was like, oh, but, the Crown still has sovereignty now. But still, for a leader of a major party, even the Labour Party, that was an extraordinary thing for him to say. And what it proves is not his benevolence, or the fact, often we're like, oh, New Zealand's got the best race relations in the country. That's always been this myth. But to the small extent to which it's true, it is only because how effective Māori are at demonstrating and securing power. And so, Chris Hipkins has a credible threat to his left in Te Pāti Māori. He's also got a very strong Māori caucus, and a big part of his voter base are Māori. And I just want to finish with, I think, an amusing anecdote. When I was still working at Parliament, which was just at the start of this term, and there was a porphyry for all the new MPs, and this was probably around the same time the government had already started giving directives to the public service to stop using te reo, etc. And one after the other, new backbenchers were getting up and introducing themselves in te reo. They were doing a mihi, and some of them really well. Like, honestly, almost all of their new MPs did this. And I just, like, obviously for most of them, it's probably a token thing. But I think for some of them, it was actually a really genuine commitment to trying to be a representative in this country and just, do the right thing. So even on the right, I think those demographic changes are having an impact. And I think that's really interesting to watch.
We might wrap it on that. Any final words from you, Pmax?
No final words. Head empty. Brain clear. Just, endlessly in awe of the depths this government will go into, but equally in awe of the strength and resilience of people and communities in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I think the good guys are going to win. So that's a positive to finish on.
That's fucking right. And Jack, any thoughts on direction that you think the left should be taking, or how we win this fight?
I think, it's it might come across as a cliche, but usually cliches are the things that are most true. It really does come down to using our collective strength, being unified and working together. There's been a lot of discourse around that in the Māori world recently because of the passing of the Māori king. And over the last few years, he was relentlessly focused on kotahitanga. And in the Māori political sense, it is definitely true. That's another thing. Like, we are probably most united as a people than we've ever been before, because we are really a nation of lots of different peoples. And so I think the extent to which the left and Māori, environmentalists, etc., can all find common cause, work together, strengthen their movements, mobilize and organize together rather than just doing that separately, which is something that I'm kind of, looking at in my work at the moment, I think is super important. We can't work in silos. We have to be working together and drawing on our shared strength. And if we can really achieve that, then we can achieve anything. And if we can achieve that, then we can actually make this a one-term government, for example. And that's only the first goal, but continuing in that way, I think, has real power.
Kia ora. Thanks so much for joining us. Jack, good to have you back.
Kia ora. Great to be here. Thank you.
And Pmax. Thanks for joining us on the Saturday morning instead of from your car.
Shot. It was nice. Thank you.
And thank you to our audience. Thanks for listening. Take these words and do with them what thou wilt. Really, really glad to have everyone here with us. Go out in your organizations. Let people know that there's indie left-wing media out there. Yeah, and come and do stuff. Reach out. Let us know what's happening. And let your friends and family know what's happening as well. Because, as Jack said, we really do need to work together. I'm begging anyone in the political parties who is listening to this to get fucking started, because as much as I don't want it to be the case, as someone who's like not a big fan of Westminster electoral system, the electoral institutions that we have are still what a large sector of society look to for leadership, and there is not enough of that right now. And I know it's hard out there as well, and I know everyone's struggling. I know it's been hard to get a foothold, but we need you, man. And it's really, really important that stuff kicks into gear 6 months ago. So please pick it up. That's been another episode of 1 of 200 Current Events. We are hurtling towards 100 episodes for season 2. When we reach that, we will be taking a short hiatus from Current Events to do all the other stuff that we need to do but don't have time to while we're doing this. We'll continue to release other podcasts and some of our kind of longer midweek podcasts during that time. The podcast will not be stopping. I just want my Saturdays free for a little while. We'll catch you next weekend, though. See you then.
If artificers are then I'm living a pointless life, but learning all your lessons. Fucking politics, there's no distinction. The road's upon now. It's paved with good intentions, and I'll admit that I'm at a loss for what to say when they criticize a cost me ought to stay. Cause I live amongst the people every day in this vindictive, forgetful fucking rain. It feels like we're on the road to hell.